Welcome to The Walls Within, the mental journey to elite performance. The primary purpose of this podcast is to educate. Some of the topics discussed today are contentious and should not be taken as professional advice or fact. If you are in a mental or emotional crisis, please seek professional resources in your local area. This podcast is previously recorded, and we misspoke regarding the number for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. The correct number is 988 and is incorrectly mentioned during this episode. Thanks for joining us as we share some thoughts, personal insight, and stories about how to conquer obstacles. In today's episode, we share our thoughts about the stigma of mental health. Each organization we've been a part of addresses mental health and emotional crisis in various ways. Is bringing up a mental health concern at work a sign of weakness? Or is coming forward during times of mental fallibility a sign of personal strength and courage? Join us today for a look at our experiences with these issues and some thoughts from those deeply connected to the discussion. My name is Dave Paolillo. I'm a 19-year U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, and I'm joined today by NHL veteran goaltender and two-time Stanley Cup champion, Curtis McElhaney. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us on episode 7 of The Walls Within. If you joined us last time for episode 6, we talked about, Curtis and I talked about balance, and we talked about some things that you can do to alleviate stress. And how to manage kind of your life and deal with all those kind of competing priorities. And so thanks for joining us for 7 here. And we're going to jump into this topic, which is near and dear to our hearts. And it's the stigma of saying the words mental health. And when I say mental health, I know that automatically in people invokes some reaction. Some people react and go, oh yeah, mental health, it's a huge concern in society today. And some people go, oh, mental health, that's just weakness. And that takes us right into this idea of there being a stigma. Okay. And so we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about some of our experiences, about those. And then we're going to leave you with, some ideas and some things. And I think to start us off, the number one thing that I would say with regard to mental health and with regard to resilient and whether or not we can cope with some overwhelming stress that's occurring in our life is to talk about it. One thing that I learned really early in my 20s was that bottling up things and feelings and emotions was not a good idea. And so the old adage of, pick yourself up, rub some dirt in it and move on and pretend it didn't happen. I think we've proven that doesn't work. It's probably not the best approach. In some cases it does. In dealing with some of those stresses, we talked about compartmentalizing on a previous episode, but at some point, you can't compartmentalize significant things, significant emotional events, dealing with deaths in the family, dealing with significant adversity, legal battles, all those sorts of things, families that have significant illnesses in kids, all those kind of things. You can insert dozens of examples, but at some point you can't compartmentalize. And so we're going to kind of delve into all of that. And I think what we want to kind of talk about right up at the very beginning is what is a mental health stigma. And so I think a mental health stigma is the reaction to hearing the words resilience or the reaction to hearing the words mental health and going, oh, that's just weakness. And so that's kind of the basis of the stigma that occurs in pockets of communities. And so what we're seeing in society, I think, is this more willingness and openness to talk about mental health, but you still see in certain communities and pockets and areas where it's not widely accepted. It's not widely talked about. And I would say the trend is getting better, but there's still a stigma. There's still this idea that if I talk about my mental weakness, it's different than if I talk about blowing out my ACL or I talk about dislocating my shoulder. Those are injuries, right? And so there are mental things that occur that are injuries to our brain, but it's just, we're just less willing to admit those. So with that being said, Curtis, I'll turn it over to you for kind of some opening thoughts and comments on this with regard to kind of stigma and some things that maybe you've seen in your career.
Yeah, so I've have two perspectives on it now. It's like, well, one, I'm outside looking in, and then I remember going back to those times when I was actively playing and immersed in that very intense culture of pro sports. And for me, I always circle back to that situation in Anaheim where I was kind of crashing and burning in a matter of weeks. And like you just alluded to, my response to that was I need to I need to come up with an injury, a physical injury that way I can say I'm hurt and I can't play. And because to me, the mindset was if I go and tell them I'm just not feeling well, or I have some sort of, I'm depressed, I have anxiety, I can't perform tonight. They'd be like, well, to me, in my brain, it said, well, I'm physically feeling fine, so I should be able to go out and do that. But mentally, I am an absolute disaster and train wreck right now. And if I go out and try and perform, I'm not going to be able to do the job. I may as well have a broken leg and just stand in the crease and not be able to perform. That's how I think they're so similar. But for me, the mindset when I was playing was, I think it's easier to come up with a physical injury because that makes sense to everyone. And that was obviously, my pro career started in 2004, 2005, and went all the way until this past season. So things are changing dramatically in regards to that landscape. And there's individuals that are advocating for themselves on a mental health side of the thing, and not coming up with a fake injury or trying to get hurt. I mean, I told the story. It was a little humorous, but I almost preferred to get into a fender bender on the way to the game just so I had some physical excuse. It's the most ridiculous sounding thing. And I laugh at the stupidity of it right these days. But when I was in it, it was serious. I could not think of a way to constructively tell the trainers or the organization that I am not mentally fit to play a hockey game right now. And I think for me, and due to the age and when I grew up, I was conditioned that you are supposed to battle and grind through situations to perform and to show up and to be there. And, I just think the topic of mental health back when I was growing up was something that was, it was like a lightning rod. And especially in pro sports, when you're fighting for a job, there was 60 positions when I came into the league, and there were probably 500,000 to 1 million goalies that grew up wanting to do that job. And the number one thing is you didn't want to lose it. I mean, you go back into the 50s, 60s when goalies were playing essentially every single game. They only had one goalie. And if that individual wasn't capable of performing, somebody else stepped in, and well, that could have been the end of your career. So, on a foolish side, you were just so concerned about losing your position in the league, losing the opportunity that you had dreamed about for all those years growing up. And unfortunately, you were doing a disservice to yourself and not advocating for yourself. But I think now, as we move forward, and we'll talk about a few cases where sports athletes have stepped up to the plate and one, either spoken about it after an event, or two, are in the moment stepping away. And that to me is probably one of the most courageous things that you could do, especially for some of these athletes that are in the limelight, that have all these expectations of what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be doing it. And all of a sudden they just put a stop to it like that. I mean, that's a powerful statement to me. And it's really hard. It's still hard for me to wrap my mind around that, being able to kind of make that statement. But when you really step back and think about it, I look back and I say, wow, I wish I had been able to do something like that, and know that I would have had the support of an organization. Now, that's not to say that I wouldn't have had the support. I just, in my mind, did not think at that time that it was the right call. Now that goes back on me, right? That's part of being able to advocate for yourself and to make those decisions and have those maybe uncomfortable conversations. But the reality is you don't know what the reaction is going to be from an organization standpoint or an individual standpoint until you actually say something. And so, that blame falls on me for not advocating for myself all those years ago and stepping up instead of thinking that I needed to grind through it. And because when I did try and grind through it, well, I was exactly what I expected I was going to be, and it wasn't very good, and it did not help anybody in that organization. So maybe me stepping away and allowing someone else to have an opportunity would have been a better decision overall for that organization back then.
Yeah. I think there's always this mindset that when you bring forth an injury, like a physical orthopedic injury, like a hip issue or a blown ACL, I keep using that example, but it's very acceptable to go, yeah, if your joint isn't functioning, you can't play. It's like a 1 or a 0, right? Oh, you have a torn ACL. You're going to be out 6 months, and we'll start fixing it. You know what I mean? And it's a cut and dry thing. But with the brain, I think there's always this idea that you talked yourself into it. So now you have to talk yourself out of it. And I think there's this reaction to hearing, oh, you're feeling down, you're feeling blue, you're not feeling like you're in the right headspace. Well, we'll fix it. Like, oh, okay. I'll tell you what, I'll look in the mirror, I'll wave my hands, I'll say a little prayer, and then I'm going to be miraculously healed by the intervention of some higher power. And then I'll be good to go. Yeah, it's not that simple. And so I think, you have your good days and your bad days, but I want to ask you, when you were in college, this idea of coming forward and admitting, mental health or depression, admitting some issue that you needed to take a knee for, would that have ever occurred to you to do when you were playing for CC? Would you have ever in a million years have done that?
None chance. And like I alluded to, for me, the mindset, the way that I had conditioned myself was that this all remains behind the mask, right?
Yep.
Everything, yep. I keep it all internalized. I show no weakness. I show up, I do my job, and therefore the organization, the school, whoever I'm playing for at that time sees no chinks in the armor of Curtis McElhinney. Exactly.
That's the perception that they have to trust you to be their gatekeeper and their stalwart in the net, right? And so I would fast forward and go, okay, in your last season playing in the NHL, if you had some major family issue that was taking away your ability to compartmentalize things going on at home or something going on with one of your kids, would you have felt comfortable walking up to the staff and going, you know what, I think you need to call the kid out of the AHL and have me kind of take a knee and give me a week or two? Would you be more inclined to do that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
The ability to advocate for yourself, and I would assume that you're in a similar situation now where you're an experienced fighter pilot. You've been doing it for so long now. You're much more in tune with where you're at.
Yeah.
I'm obviously the maturity level of every individual grows as you get older.
Yeah.
But knowing that I would be doing the team a disservice by trying to participate in a game when I wasn't mentally
exactly
there 100% would mean more to me than showing up and trying to do the job at, say, 60% and not doing a very good job, and the team loses anyways as a result of me just not saying something. So I think the way I would look at it now versus the way I would have looked at it when I was 20 are drastically different, obviously. I've mentioned in the past that I'm an extremely slow learner. I'm very thick-headed. I will try and fight something to the very end, but the reality is that you need to understand when you are a disservice to the organization and team if you try and perform at a less than 100% level. And so later on in my career, I definitely would have said something. I was also much more aware that if, hey, something was creeping up or I wasn't feeling 100%, I was far more open to talking about it with people than I was when I was younger. And, sometimes just having basic conversations could kind of help steer me out of that direction as well, instead of having to actually take time off, but just being able to speak about things or to express the way that I may be feeling in a current moment was a good way to kind of steer the ship back to where I needed to be.
Absolutely. I think two things are going on. We'll talk about the culture and the movement and the way things are being kind of looked at now. But I think you talked about maturity. I think that's the number one thing going on. I think with maturity comes a little bit of I don't really care what you think anymore. This is me, and I'm just going to tell you. And so you've just kind of resolved yourself when you kind of grow up and you reach your 30s and your 40s. You just kind of, you don't make apologies anymore. You're just kind of like, this is who I am, and I'm sorry, but you know what? I'm falling short, and sorry. I don't want to fall short. I want to be at the top of my game, but I need to take a break, or I need to take a knee. And I think you just resolve yourself to being more willing to do that. And
I think you have a greater appreciation of the time that you're allotted in this life as you get older. Obviously, like anyone that starts entering their the 30s and 40s and 50s, you appreciate. You're like, no thanks, I'm good. Like, when to say no, right. And when to speak up for yourself, because it's so critical to moving forward with anything instead of just trying to bury it and internalize it and keep it all in.
The one thing though that I think stands out more than the others that you mentioned though is this realization and this maturity to recognize that if you go into an activity such as playing golf for a hockey team, or in my case flying, if I go in and I'm not 100% mentally attached to that task, the risks are far, far greater than the reward of me sucking it up, rubbing dirt in it, and pressing, even though I'm not ready to do that. And the risks in playing goal is, you go in, you're not totally concentrating on the game, you're distracted, and you're a sieve, and you let in 7, 8 goals, or you let in 3 or 4 in a period, and you get pulled. That hurts your team, as you mentioned, more than it would if you had taken a knee and gone, you know what, go with somebody else tonight, coach. I don't have it. In the flying world, if I go and fly and I'm not totally 100% mentally in the game, and I get airborne and I'm distracted and there's a bunch of airplanes, or I'm flying in the weather like I was talking to you about earlier, and something happens, there's a safety of flight issue, there's a near miss, there's some egregious mistake, or I fly into an airspace I'm not supposed to fly into, or something like that, and I attribute it to not being mentally prepared or being distracted, then that's a lack of maturity. And then that's a lack of responsibility as an aviator, because I have an absolute obligation to the team, to the Air Force, to my country, to make sure that every time I step into that jet, I'm ready to go. And if I'm not, I put my hand up and I go, I got to take a knee. It doesn't even matter why. And the fighter squadron, it's really nice because I have the ability to go, you know what? I don't have it today. And I don't really have to explain why. We do this thing called operational risk management, where I'm constantly reevaluating my ability to perform my task, both as an individual and the way I fit into the team. And if I get too many check marks in the boxes and I go from green to yellow to red, like a stoplight, if I'm red for ORM, I can walk up to the squadron commander, I can walk up to the operations supervisor, and I can go, I don't have it today. And they often won't ask why. The next thing they'll do is go, okay, well, let's figure out how we can swap you with somebody else, and let's mitigate it. Let's come up with a plan. And then afterwards, it's really on me on how much I divulge or how much I talk about. But that sort of environment has to occur in the flying world, because I have to be able to be comfortable to go, you know what, I can't do it today, and not fear backlash and things like that.
Yeah. I love that side of it. Like to hear that the Air Force's mindset is, it's not a question of what's going on. It's like automatically, like Jocko's mindset, we just turn and look for a resolution. All right, Great. What are we doing next? Good.
That's right.
Let's deal with the issue.
Yep.
One thing I will say is that when I was a part of the Toronto Maple Leafs organization, is that they had a wellness check every morning. So you would have to come onto the computer, you do your weigh in or whatever, just to make sure you weren't crushing too many carbs late at night or eating ice cream. And then you would fill out this questionnaire every single day that we were at home. They had a wellness questionnaire, and it was just a list of, maybe anywhere from 7 to 10 questions. Wow. Of kind of just how you were feeling, not only physically, but I think mentally as well. And it gives them kind of that like baseline, so they can see where all their individuals were at. Now, I remember filling that thing out on a daily basis and just be like, this is the most annoying thing ever. But when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty impressive that an organization, obviously Toronto's an original six, they have money out the wazoo, so they can afford to put things in place and try different things. And this was an attempt to make sure that they were kind of in sync with and in tune with the individuals in that organization. And to hear that, when you talk about the stakes, I think they're drastically different than what we're talking about when you play hockey. You're flying a jet that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and there's people's lives that are on the line, even in a practice session.
Absolutely.
So the stakes are dramatically different. But to know that they're constantly checking on where you're at in most days, it sounds like. And then also
every day we fly, there's an ORM assessment.
Yeah. That's tremendous. And the fact that they're really not asking questions, it's just about finding a resolution. And if it goes further than that I'm sure there's resources for you to kind of tap into and to make sure they can kind of steer that ship back to where you need to be and where they need you to be at.
Absolutely. And so we talked about, that it sounds like the Leafs were doing an ORM assessment, and I would equate it to that. It sounds like every day they're doing an ORM assessment to figure out how you're doing. And it's really on the individual to take that seriously and give reliable information. I know, I have little doubt that there were guys on the Leafs that answered those questions the same way every time they got them. They were just like, whatever, I'm going to whip the same answers. Everything is fine. I'm good. And they would never in a million years have thought about answering one of those like, oh, I'm feeling blue today. They never would have responded honestly because they were, again, probably worried. It was probably attributable. And so they would. Same with ORM. I think that there are probably a lot of young aviators that on days when they're not feeling it, they still check the box that they're green on stuff. And so this individual responsibility comes in. And I think what a culture starts to foster is this idea of honesty when they realize that the older hats that are being honest aren't suffering significant negative repercussions. And they're kind of celebrated for their honesty, and they're celebrated for coming forward and going, yeah, you know what? So-and-so took a knee today because he's got some stuff going on at home, but we're going to get him back on the schedule next week or something like that. And people go, wow, the reaction wasn't what they thought it would be. And so when you work in a culture like that, where there's this kind of acceptance of people being able to come forward, then it sort of erases that stigma. And I think that's what's kind of happening now in pockets and communities and things. But, there's still this other kind of looming negativity surrounding it. But let's jump into an article, Curtis. We both read this article from a Brad Brenner, and it's a little over a year ago. It's from August 31st of 21. And this guy's a PhD, and he talks about elite athletes, and he talks about specifically Michael Phelps and Simone Biles. And if you're not familiar with either of those, both of them are elite athletes, Olympians. Michael Phelps, the swimmer, Simone Biles, the gymnast. But it talks in here and it says, unfortunately, many people still assume that mental health concerns are rare among professional athletes or among elite athletes, and that they're perceived to be strong and healthy individuals. And in the United States, those two Olympians that I mentioned are often idealized on media and subject to a large fan base, contributing to the idea that they're immune to mental health conditions. They're put on this pedestal. They're role models. They're, anybody that's a gymnast or a swimmer in the United States looks up to Michael Phelps and Simone Biles because they're at the top of their game. And so you've got young people that want to be just like them. But those two individuals, and among thousands of others, are particularly vulnerable. And that's what this article talks about. And as we move on, it talks about some of the challenges, but there's some really interesting information here, and I want to kind of talk about it. And Curtis, I want to get your reactions. But in the words of Dr. Thelma Dye Holmes, is somebody that's quoted. Her name is Thelma Dye Holmes. Is a quote here. It says, "Mental health has a stigma that is tied into weakness and is absolutely the antithesis of what athletes want to portray. Consequently, athletes often feel pressured to mask or hide their mental health symptoms instead of seeking mental health care. A stigma remains the primary barrier for seeking mental health treatment. Failing to seek proper treatment, athletes can negatively affect performance, especially in high-stakes competitions and events where it feels like they're carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. Sometimes changes in athletes' mental care can result in a poor score or performance. Other times, these symptoms can serve as dangerous distractions. When a gymnast flips through the air, if they're not 100% concentrated on nailing their landing, that can lead to significant injury or even death. And so in any case, the athletes deserve time to kind of sort things out, even if that means sitting or missing a few games. And so what it's saying is that because of the pedestal we put some of these athletes on, we create kind of our own unwieldy beast or monster, if you will. And what specifically in the case of Simone Biles, I know that there's a lot of negative reaction to her kind of stepping out of the Olympics, but there's also a lot of support and a lot of positive reactions. And it kind of shows where our culture is on the issue. On one hand, people, again, that have subscribed to that old adage of just rub some dirt on it and suck it up and get out there and do your job. She suffered a lot of those attacks. But then other folks looked at it as a celebration to go, this is a pretty young person that has the maturity at the level that she's at to go, you know what? I don't have it. And the timing is terrible, but I need to take a knee, because I think she recognized what would have been worse would have been to go in there, not be 100% in and get either crushed or hurt herself. And that would bring her team down. And so, you know, on the one hand, I celebrate her maturity significantly, but then I ask myself, at what point did we see this snowball occurring? And could we have headed it off sooner? Or did it need to wait right at the time that it occurred for her? Or could we have found it out 6 months prior and maybe done something to alleviate some of that pressure before it came to the breaking point? Curtis, what do you think?
I think it's just a byproduct of our culture these days, and the way that we have a tendency to want to build individuals up, especially in a sport where, you know, they're on TV all the time. They have multiple endorsements. They're multiple gold winning athletes in the case of these two athletes. And, you know, you can look at Simone and say, wow, I can't imagine what that took to step away when you stood a chance to become one of the greatest athletes in your sport of all time. Now, you know, and then you can look at Michael Phelps on the flip side of things, where, you know, Phelps went and performed and maybe kind of exercised some of those feelings and all that stuff outside of the swimming pool, right? And we remember him making headlines for probably some not the greatest behaviors, but at the same point, he was probably trying to relieve some of this tension that he had been experiencing, and was also, I'm sure, I know now he's an advocate for mental health and speaking up about it and having resources available. But at the same point, when he was going through it, similar to myself, that was something that he probably just kept all inside. Maybe he was working with some people at the time, but I think a lot of that was kind of kept inside. And then all of a sudden it just comes out, and, you know, he's in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. And here we have one of the greatest athletes of all time. And I know now the story is turned, but like we said, it's a maturity thing. He's getting older. Swimming career is over essentially. Now it's about advocating for the other side of it and standing up for these athletes. So Simone's unique in the sense that she was actively participating in an event that you have one opportunity to do every 4 years. Now, I know there are other competitions throughout the sport that mean quite a bit, but I think on the world stage, the Olympics is still the kind of the marquee event where you set yourself apart as an athlete. And to think of the pressure that comes with that and the expectations of everyone around you, all the people that are promoting you and helping you be a part of that, I'm sure that's just a weight on your shoulders that's unimaginable. And, you know, at the end of the day, it is an athletic endeavor, but the way we have a tendency to build things up and to put an emphasis on how important a sport is, or a gold medal, or winning any championship, or performing in a sport is really not that important at the end of the day, unfortunately. You know, that's just the reality of it. It's a game. We're playing a game, you know, and that's a hard perspective to look at, because we're just constantly bombarded with advertisements and images of these individuals being something that's just, they almost seem unhuman, right? Where they're up, like you said, on that pedestal. So
one of the things, you know, I asked you kind of a pointed question, Curtis, and apologies. I know we get into some controversial topics, and I asked you, hey, when you were in college, would you have stepped up and admitted? And you said no. And I look back at my own experience when I was in college, and I was going through some really kind of tough times and things that I couldn't handle, but I was afraid to ask for help until it came to a head, and I was forced to get help. And I didn't step up because I didn't have the guts. Frankly, I didn't have the guts to ask for help, even though I was fairly confident I knew I needed it. But it took some involvement from namely my dad, for me to kind of get a smack across the face to go get some help, which is interesting because my dad is one of those guys that is the rub some dirt in it and suck it up, right? Vietnam combat vet, and a tough guy. And so, but it took him kind of smacking me going, you need some help. And so I look at Simone Biles, and I look, and she's 25 years old. She's 25 years old, grappling with that pressure, and has the ability to step up on the world stage, knowing what it's going to do, knowing that it's going to polarize the world or at least the U.S. to the reaction, but the gymnast world, but the U.S. and there are people that are going to celebrate her and people that are going to villainize her. And at 25 years old, know that you're going to do that. And she knew. I don't think she was unaware that there was going to be this reaction, but she didn't care. And so I think I really believe it takes a tremendous amount of courage thinking through that and going, well, if I step forward, I'm going to get kind of beat up a little bit in the media. And she did it anyway. Speaks to what I think is happening in our culture, which is this mindset of looking at things and going, in the grand scheme, does this game or even does this Olympics matter? 20, 30 years ago, I mean, it crumbled people. These kind of the pressures of this type of thing crumble people. Even look at Michael Phelps and look at the way he dealt with it. And, we're kind of comparing apples and oranges, but the fact that she came forward and said, you know what, I don't have it. And I'm going to bow out and I'll live to fight another day. Big time. That's courage. And I think that's an example for young people to kind of look at that. With that being said, there's a trend now in culture. We'll kind of shift gears here. We can talk a little bit about the military. There's a trend in culture to fess up to mental health things. In the military, when I first joined the Air Force in 1995, there was this, if you were going to go seek psychological or psychiatric help, you went to the mental health clinic. It was a subsidiary of the medical providers unit there, and you go see mental health. Well, at some point, the Air Force decided to change the name because the stigma, going to mental health, the stigma in the late 90s and early 2000s of going to the mental health clinic meant, oh, what are you, a crazy person? You need a shrink, you need medication. And so they were trying to get rid of that stigma. And so what they did is they renamed it and they called it life skills. And that lasted for a little while and then it switched back. And so now we call it mental health again. And so it speaks to kind of where we've been and where we went and kind of where we're going now as a culture. But I stumbled upon this article and it's actually really shocking. And it was is a journal article, and it's from 2015, and it's a list of researchers in here. We're going to post that on our Instagram in the link tree. But it's called The Stigma, and you can search it. Stigma as a barrier to seeking health care among military personnel with mental health problems. And there is a ton of research in here. But there are two things that really stick out to me and cause me kind of concern. It says approximately 60% of military people in the U.S., Canada, and the UK who experience mental health problems don't seek help. 60%. And then of those that receive a diagnosis in the U.S., 60 to 70% don't receive adequate care to address the diagnosis. Adequate care is defined as 8 sessions within the year of diagnosis, as defined by these researchers. So folks that are really smart on these issues, they research these topics. So I look at that and I go, okay, that was in 2015. I'd be really curious to know what those stats are now. And I would venture to say, without any proof or backing or data to support it, that those numbers have ticked down quite a bit. And I think it goes to the culture, but this is still a problem. And I know that if you studied other groups of folks, if you studied pockets of people, Ivy League college students, all these different groups of folks, I think the numbers are probably still pretty skewed to people not wanting to step forward. And so what's this trend mean in culture for us to be able to talk about mental health? And it does, I think, two things. One, it brings those issues to the forefront, and it allows a little bit of the stigma to get erased. But at the same token, as that stigma is getting erased, it also creates kind of this negativity towards saying the words mental health or using mental health as an excuse. And we found a couple of articles. But Curtis, what are your thoughts on kind of where we're going culturally? And I do want to talk about what we found in this accessibility.com article about some of the trends. And we were talking about it earlier before we jumped on the podcast about youth today and about getting excusals and things.
Yeah, I think the thing for us is that, and this is still where I have hangups and try and wrap my mind around something regarding this issue. It's like, at what point does it become an issue of, where we grew up thinking that you just had to grind through a situation and develop the perseverance and resilience to overcome an obstacle. To whereas now, maybe by taking a step back, advocating for yourself, what we're actually finding is that the pool for potential applicants of a job or a position may become that much bigger. Whereas before, we may have been limiting that pool when, if an individual said they had some sort of mental health issue, or you saw a mental health issue in someone, you just automatically crossed them off your list and you didn't want anything to do with them because you're like, nope, I don't need to deal with this headache. I think this is going to be a detriment to the position that I want to fill. Whereas now, I think if we take a step back, maybe we can help this person actually learn to deal with some issues and to overcome some situations. I may actually get a better individual for the job that I want to fill or the task that I need done. And I think when you think of it from that perspective, you say, okay, instead of limiting what the pool is I want to look at, I want to open this whole thing up. And if somebody needs a little bit more help or work in coping or learning to deal with certain situations, maybe by giving them the tools, we may actually get something that's far greater than what we expected. And so that's kind of how I'm trying to reframe a situation and look at it and say, this may be beneficial by opening this up to more people and encouraging people to advocate for themselves and encouraging them to have a conversation, to go and find resources, tools that can help you learn to deal with situations. And, I think the big thing with the mental health is it's such an individual concept. It's not across the board. Everybody has the same experience, right? It's such a unique and individualistic thing. Now, there may be some groups that you can kind of lump things into, but at the end of the day, it's an individual thing. And you can't say that what I'm experiencing is going to be the same as what you may be experiencing in a similar situation. So, the challenging part to that is, well, there's a lot of people and there's a lot of kids that go to school and there's a lot of people in a workforce, and all of a sudden you have to cater to each individual person to kind of help them. How do you meet the demands of all of these people that may be having different experiences? Yeah. And that's the one where I have a tough part kind of conceptualizing how that would work in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. There are people that will naturally fall through the cracks. If you look at the way our systems are built, look at our school systems. Let's focus on talking about kids. One of the things that sticks out in this conversation is I go back to episode 2. And do you remember what Andrew Ladd said about, we talked about it as one of his goals of 1616 was invest in kids because it's easier to provide kids with skills. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's easier to provide kids with skills than to fix broken adults. And so it touches exactly on what you just mentioned. And so accessibility.com has this article, and it talks about, it's by Amanda Dodge, and it's from May of this year, and it's called "The Movement to Consider Mental Health and Excused Absence is Growing." And it talks about Kentucky House Bill 44, an act relating to student mental health. And it talks about Florida House Bill 289, which is school absence due to sickness or injury. And it's talking about a trend where we provide school-age kids the method of using we've never had a problem with excused absences for when you're sick or if you have COVID, oh, you've got to stay out of school and all those things. But there's a quote here: "A local school district's student attendance policy shall include provisions for excused absences due to a student's mental or behavioral health status." Okay. So does that mean the kid's having a bad day and is feeling sad and doesn't want to go to school because they're upset that their team lost the night before on Monday Night Football? So Tuesday, you know what? I'm not going to go to school. I'm just feeling really, really down. Well, I think that's an extreme example of manipulation of a system. We're always going to see people trying to take advantage of things. But I think what this is going to do is it's going to provide an apparatus by which we can have those conversations and get that meaningful kind of interaction. If a student in a school fesses up and takes an excused absence for mental health, I would hope, and this is potentially a pipe dream, but there is going to be some leader, some teacher, some other student, some provider, a parent, somebody is going to step in and get involved. But if we create this environment where students feel comfortable talking about those things and admitting that they're feeling depressed or feeling anxious or angry or have these things going that they don't know how to deal with, then it may prevent the cataclysmic events that we see in media and in the news where we have these people that go, oh, I always knew something was wrong with Johnny or Jane. And I'm not surprised that they went into a school and took a weapon and shot a bunch of people. And you always see the regret in the aftermath of situations like that. And I have to ask myself, is creating a culture like this where we try to get as far left of those incidents as we can by intervening when somebody is 12 or 13 years old exhibiting signs of depression or anxiety, and not waiting until they're adults committing crimes or even kids committing crimes, and we get involved. And it starts with creating this environment where people feel that they can have the conversation. People feel like they can come forward and go, I have this uncontrollable anger and I don't know what to do with it. And so I have to ask myself, like, what is the bad in this? The bad is people take advantage of it. But the good is that we start a conversation among our vulnerable communities of people, i.e. our kids, and we start giving them some resources as far left of incident or as cataclysmic, life-changing, life-altering thing. We get as far left of that as we can, and we get involved. And it could be friends, it could be a parent, a teacher, it doesn't matter. It's providing some support to helping people by erasing the stigma and allowing people an apparatus by which to ask for help. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the thing too that, the more we discuss this topic today is, when I really think about it, is that if all of a sudden kids start advocating for themselves and having conversations, I think what it does, instead of, I mentioned just a few minutes back about, the ability to develop perseverance and resiliency. Well, I think advocating for yourself actually empowers the individual, and it gives them confidence and the ability to know that there are resources. And as a result of seeking out these resources, having these conversations, you're going to develop this resiliency and this confidence and all these tools and skills that you need to be a healthy individual. And if you know that there's something out there that can help you, that to me is such an empowering thought. And I think, the things that we tried to develop by just sheer stubbornness and grit.
I think we stumbled on them. We stumbled on them, not because of any, deliberate plan. We just got, I guess we got lucky. I don't know.
That's it. And this could be an actual quicker way to achieve the things that we want to achieve. And that's, healthier students, healthier adults, athletes, military, across the board, you name it. It's probably one of those things where it becomes something that almost empowers the individual to work together with other people and to develop this sense of community and knowing that there's other people out there that actually care about you and are willing to help you. You probably end up developing that resiliency anyways. Yeah.
As a counter, we found another article. It comes from an Indian website from India, and it's and there's a quote in here. It talks about the thing that I touched on, and this manipulation of mental health awareness, and this manipulation of being able to play the mental health card at work or at school and get out of things. And it says there's a difference between actual illnesses and issues such as depression, anxiety, or other mental illnesses, and what happens in our daily life. However, daily stressors are a form of eustress, which is good stress, that help us in becoming more productive. However, avoiding responsibilities and using mental illnesses as an excuse is one of the worst forms of self-care. So we'll post that article too. It's actually, again, I don't agree with everything in it, but it brings to the forefront this idea of, mental health and addressing depression is not the same thing as feeling stressed and bowing out of life. Those are not the same things. And so that's kind of an important semantic. And where's the line drawn? Well, it's tough. And so neither one of us are experts in the field, but we can certainly talk about it and give our opinions. But I think to your point, you and I stumbled upon learning resiliency and learning perseverance circumstances. Yeah, we're both stubborn people, and I think the similarities in our personalities led us to be successful through those adversities and through those things, but I don't think everybody is as lucky. And I would say luck because I don't think there's anything deliberate that I did other than just keep my nose down and continue moving forward. But I had plenty of opportunity to fold and quit. I just didn't because I'm stubborn. But I don't think it's because I'm particularly more mentally resilient than anybody else. It's just because I'm stubborn, and I think that quality prevented me from quitting and allowed me to just kind of carry on. And I think you're similar, Curtis. But as we approach the 1 hour point, we always kind of promise to leave folks with this idea. And by the way, I do want to put this plug in here. If you've got opinions on this, or you're listening and you've got some strong feelings or one way or the other, please interact with us. We're gonna put a post on Instagram. There's opportunities to email us, both Curtis at thewallswithin.com or Dave at thewallswithin.com. Want to hear your opinion, want to get your feedback. This is an ongoing conversation that I think is worthwhile. And I think we'll have future guests and we'll revisit this topic because it's kind of the overall theme of the podcast. But Curtis, we'll wrap this up. So this is the back end of the Brenner article where we talked about Simone Biles and Michael Phelps, but it talks about mental health resources for athletes. And I think we can line through athletes, put a blank there and just call it mental health resources because it isn't just for athletes. It could be anybody in any walk of life, but it says for adolescent athletes and high profile professional athletes, starting a conversation about mental health is integral to combat the stigma. Some helpful mental health resources to help athletes prioritize their mental wellness include, and we'll go through these. First and foremost, and we'll kind of jump through them here really quick, and then Curtis, I'll get your reactions there. But therapy, working with a mental health provider, such as a clinical psychologist or sports psychologist, can help you gain valuable insight into your mental health, learn healthy coping mechanisms, and regain strength. Support groups. Support groups provide a unique opportunity to connect with other individual athletes in similar situations. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, called the NAMI, offers various support groups and mental health advocacy resources for individuals experiencing mental health struggles, including, it lists out a wealth of resources associated with that group, the National Alliance. Okay. Third one is social support. If you're experiencing stress or burnout, talk to your coach, teammates, support staff, or athletic trainers. They can provide valuable mental health resources, including reevaluating your training program or providing a referral for a mental health screening. And then finally, social media. And this one surprises me because I believe in some cases, social media is potentially a root to some of the issues that our youth especially are having, but also adults. But there's some goodness associated with social media too. It really brings the world together, and it allows you to find support among other people that are like-minded, that are in similar stations in life, that are experiencing similar things. And so it brought you and I together, Curtis, to be able to kind of talk about these issues. And without it, I don't think we have the apparatus or the ability to kind of get synced up. And so it says, whether you're recovering after a traumatic event or you've been diagnosed with OCD, sharing your personal story and finding your own voice can help inspire younger athletes, especially during COVID-19 when many U.S. athletes are facing loneliness and isolation. It's important to talk openly about wellness so that we're not continuing a destructive cycle of ignoring these issues. And then finally, there are helplines. And one of the things I'm very, very happy to see is in the United States, we just started at what I believe it's, is it 811? I want to say it's 811 is basically a 911 version of if you're in suicidal crisis, you can call up a national number and get some help. There's also the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is listed here, 1-800-273-8255. There's a NAMI helpline, but I believe it's 811, and I apologize if I'm getting that wrong. But all of those things are not just helpful for athletes, they're helpful for people in general. And whether you're a student, whether you're wherever you may work, there are resources available. And so I think, I listed out some of those. The big thing is, again, what it says at the top of this article, it simply says starting a conversation. It is talking to anybody to get it going. And then you can dive into more of the specifics of the resources there. This doesn't just apply to athletes, it applies to everybody. So Curtis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, there's so many good suggestions in there on where to go. I think, the things that jump out to me, social support, obviously, as a member of a team for a number of years in hockey, there were always individuals in that locker room that you were having conversations with on a daily basis. The one, like you said, that jumps out to me is social media, which is bizarre because, it's kind of that love-hate relationship. Yep. And, it's a spot where I now share quite a bit of the stories that I experienced. And a lot of it is, it's a way to journal, in essence, a modern form of journaling. And I'm not as concerned what the response is to them, but, the fact that people will read a story that, we've talked about on here before and something that I experienced, and it may have been less than pleasant, that, hey, that may help one person. And if somebody gains something from that, then I'm more than willing to share whatever experiences or stories or things that I've gone through on there. And I think that's what it's all about, right? You're creating these support groups, these environments where people are willing to have conversations. And that's the main goal of anything. Is it's a communication thing. It's not a internalizing it. It's not a bottling it up. It's about creating conversations and knowing that these conversations are safe, respectful, and that the bottom line is we should be there for each other.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, just because there are some people that will manipulate the term mental health or manipulate an issue that's going on in their brain that's very difficult to diagnose without conversation, just because that potential exists does not mean we need to continue and further the stigma of mental health and mental awareness in our country or in North America or in the world, frankly. It's an important conversation. It's important to give people a voice, give people an avenue to talk about these things. And if we take that away because we're afraid of manipulation or people taking advantage of it, then I think we're missing the boat. So,
we're at a great juncture right now where, things are becoming amplified in terms of the stress and the feelings that are getting put on the individual. But at the same point, I think people are also realizing the opportunity that we have and the good that can come from having communications. I mean, one of the things that I'm taking away from this conversation today, when I spoke about the Leafs having this wellness check and you spoke about the Air Force having something similar, is, you know, in a perfect world, wouldn't it be incredible if the students in a school had to take a wellness check before they came to school? And it was almost like you'd have a baseline of where your kids were all at, and even the students would have an understanding of kind of where they're at, and they could almost see a trend. You know, maybe they were trickling down one way or another. Now, I know we're all very protective of our information, so that's probably that's a tall task there. I might be getting into a community that people don't really want to deal with, but I think the importance of it and the understanding of where you are on a daily basis, even if it's for your own information, can sometimes be a pretty critical thing. And it was as simple as answering 10 questions on a computer in my case. And if I had have seen kind of the trend, it's like, well, maybe I would have been able to look at that trend and go to somebody if I felt like, you know, it's almost like you don't even see it coming on, but the way that you're answering questions over a week or a handful of days seems to be indicating that something may be creeping in right now. Why don't I get ahead of it and go have a conversation with somebody? I don't know.
Absolutely. Let's start small. Every day we're walking around, put the phone down, look people in the eye, ask them how they're doing, and legitimately mean it when you ask them. And if you get an answer that seems like they may not be doing well, then maybe ask them a follow-on question or two. And start a conversation as simply as, how are you? And if you don't get the response you think you may get, then pry a little bit. Find out what's going on with somebody, especially those that you're close to. What do you think?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, my thing is just even neighbors in the community. I got to walk my dog every day. So, you know, it's a priority that when you walk by someone, you actually maybe acknowledge them.
Yeah.
You know, there's not much to it, I feel like, at times.
Yeah. I think as I've learned these skills over my life, what's wound up happening now is I have diarrhea of the mouth. People ask me how I'm doing, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing that great today. I'm kind of a little bit upset about something that happened. And people are like, whoa, maybe TMI, right? Too much info, but I don't know. It's a balance. With that, thanks everybody for listening. I do really appreciate everybody's support, and we're looking for your open and honest feedback and all the ways that we talked about. So thanks for joining us, and join us next time for episode 8. We've got some more interesting conversations in store for you on The Walls Within.